I found out I wasn't invited to my own son's wedding on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in the checkout line at the grocery store with a carton of eggs cracking softly in my shaking hands. The woman behind the counter didn't notice. She was busy gossiping with a coworker about a cousin's engagement, something about lace dresses and destination weddings. I smiled politely when she looked up at me, paid for my things, and walked out into the parking lot as if the ground beneath me hadn't just shifted. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. The sky was that dull, overcast gray that makes everything feel unfinished. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look exactly the same when your life had just quietly split in two. I had paid for the wedding, every part of it. The venue deposit, the caterer, the flowers, the little extras no one thinks about until the bill arrives. And somehow, I wasn't invited. Before all of that, before the shock and the silence and the questions that kept me awake at night, my life was simple in the way a middle-aged woman's life often is. I am a mother of one, just one son. His name is Daniel, and from the moment I first held him, red-faced and angry at the world, my life organized itself around him. I wasn't perfect. I worked too much when he was little. I worried too loudly. I loved too fiercely. But everything I did, every decision I made, had his well-being tucked somewhere inside it. Daniel grew up kind, gentle. He was the type of boy who held doors open without thinking about it, who helped his teachers carry boxes after class. When his father left, Daniel was 12 then, he took it quietly, too quietly. I remember finding him one night sitting on his bed, staring at the wall, his homework untouched. "He said it's not your fault," Daniel told me, his voice steady in a way that scared me more than tears would have. "So don't cry, Mom." I cried anyway, just not where he could see me. We became a team after that, just the two of us. Sunday breakfasts with burnt toast and too much butter, late-night talks at the kitchen table when he was in college, books spread out between us, coffee growing cold as we talked about his future. I paid his tuition in installments, cutting back on everything else. No vacations, no new furniture, just Daniel and the quiet pride of watching him build something for himself. When he met Emily, I was happy for him, truly. He told me about her on the phone one evening. "He's different," he said. "You'll like her." I remember smoothing the edge of the tablecloth with my fingers, smiling to myself. "I'll love her," I said, "if you do." The first time I met Emily was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. She was pretty in a soft, careful way, polite, a little reserved. She shook my hand instead of hugging me, which I told myself was just nerves. Not everyone grows up in a family where affection is worn on the outside. "She's lovely," I told Daniel later as we stood by my car. And she was, or at least she seemed to be. The engagement came a year later. Daniel invited me over for dinner, cooked pasta himself, burned the garlic bread. When he pulled out the ring, my heart felt like it might burst right out of my chest. Emily cried. Daniel laughed. I cried too, dabbing my eyes with a napkin and telling them how happy I was. "We're thinking something small," Emily said carefully, "but meaningful." I nodded. "Whatever you want," I said, and I meant it. It was my idea to help pay. I brought it up gently over coffee a few days later. "I've been saving," I told Daniel, "for years. I'd like to contribute as your gift." He hesitated. "Mom, you don't have to." "I want to," I said. "Let me do this." Emily smiled then. A tight smile, but a smile all the same. "That's very generous," she said. I took it as gratitude. I didn't know then how easily generosity can be mistaken for something else. Planning moved quickly. Venues were toured, menus discussed, emails sent back and forth. Emily handled most of it, looping me in when it came to payments. I wrote checks, transferred funds, kept a careful spreadsheet like I always had. Sometimes I felt distant from the process, like I was watching it through glass. Emily had strong opinions, colors, seating arrangements, guest lists. "We're keeping it intimate," she said once when I asked about inviting a few relatives, just close family. Of course, I thought. That makes sense. Daniel seemed tired whenever we talked, distracted. I told myself it was wedding stress. That's what everyone says, isn't it? Then came the small things. A conversation that ended too quickly when I walked into the room, emails that went unanswered, a bridal shower I heard secondhand. "Oh," Emily said lightly when I mentioned it, "it was very last minute." I nodded, smiled, let it go. You learn as a mother not to cling too tightly. You learn to step back, even when your heart wants to step forward. I wish now that I had asked more questions, that I had trusted the unease curling quietly in my stomach. The truth didn't arrive with a dramatic confrontation or a shouted confession. It slipped into my life the way bad news often does, casually, unexpectedly, in the middle of an ordinary day. It was a cashier's voice that did it. "So," she said, sliding my receipt toward me, "are you excited for the big day?" I blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your son's wedding," she said, smiling. "Emily was in here yesterday, said it's this Saturday at the Vineyard." The world tilted. "This Saturday?" I repeated. "Yeah," she said. "Said they wanted something quiet, no fuss." I walked out before she could say anything else. Saturday. I wasn't invited. And as I sat there in my car, groceries forgotten on the passenger seat, one thought looped over and over in my mind, heavier than the last. I drove home on autopilot that day, my hands steady on the wheel while everything inside me rattled like loose change. I remember stopping at a red light and realizing I was holding my breath. I let it out slowly, the way I used to when Daniel was little and panicking about school tests. In through the nose, out through the mouth. "Calm yourself," I told my own reflection in the rearview mirror. The groceries sat untouched on the counter when I got home. Milk warming, lettuce wilting. I didn't care. I sat at the kitchen table instead, the same one where I'd helped Daniel with spelling words and college applications, and stared at the faint ring left by years of coffee cups. Saturday. 3 days away. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages with Daniel. There was nothing unusual at first glance. Short check-ins, a thumbs-up reaction to a photo I'd sent of a quilt I was working on. No mention of dates, no invitation, no directions, no "Mom, we'll see you there." I typed his name and hit call. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, Mom," his recorded voice said, warm and familiar. "Leave a message." I hung up without speaking. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying moments in my head, looking for clues I might have missed. Emily's careful tone, Daniel's tired eyes, the way conversations had shifted from warm and open to polite and brief. By morning, the hurt had hardened into something sharper. I decided to call Emily. She answered on the second ring. "Hi," she said, her voice bright, almost too bright. I could hear something clinking in the background. Glasses, maybe, preparations. "Emily," I said, "it's me." A pause, just a beat too long. "Oh, hi. I ran into someone yesterday." I continued, keeping my voice even. "I ran into someone yesterday. She mentioned the wedding is this Saturday, at the Vineyard." Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, that's right," she said carefully. I waited, let the silence stretch out. "And?" I asked. She sighed. "We were going to talk to you." "When?" I asked softly. "Soon." The word hung there, thin and hollow. Emily, I said, my fingers curling against the edge of the table, am I invited to my son's wedding? There it was, out in the open, no room left for misunderstanding. She exhaled. We thought it might be complicated. Complicated, I repeated. Daniel has been under a lot of stress, and we wanted the day to be peaceful. I closed my eyes. And I disturbed the peace? No, that's not what I meant. It's just we didn't want any negativity. Negativity. I thought of the years I'd spent holding my family together with careful words and quiet sacrifices, of swallowing my own disappointments so my son wouldn't feel them, of writing checks and smiling through planning meetings where I felt more like a wallet than a mother. I see. And I did, finally. Daniel will call you, she added. We just need to get through this week. Get through it. I hung up without saying goodbye. Daniel did call that evening. His voice was tight, defensive before I'd even spoken. Mom, he said, I know you're upset. Am I? I asked. A pause. Emily told you found out. Found out, I echoed, as if it were a surprise party I accidentally spoiled. He sighed. We didn't want things to get emotional. I laughed then, a short, broken sound that surprised us both. It's a wedding, Daniel. It's supposed to be emotional. You don't understand. Emily's parents are very traditional. They asked questions about Dad, about the divorce. My chest tightened. So you decided it was easier to erase me. That's not... You let me pay, I interrupted, my voice shaking despite my efforts. You let me write check after check, and you didn't think to tell me I wouldn't be welcome? There was silence on the other end, heavy, guilty. We didn't know how, he said finally. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I raised you to tell the truth, I said, even when it's uncomfortable. I'm sorry, he said, and for the first time, he sounded like my son again, small, ashamed. Sorry didn't change the fact that I was being quietly excluded from one of the most important days of his life. I won't come, I said. The words tasted bitter. I won't make a scene. I won't embarrass you. That's not what we want, he quickly said. Then what do you want, Daniel? I asked. He didn't answer. The days leading up to Saturday passed in a strange haze. I went to work, answered emails, smiled at neighbors. All the while, a part of me was counting down the hours to a moment I wouldn't be a part of. On Friday afternoon, I received an email from the venue confirming final payment. My name was on the receipt. I stared at it for a long time. That night, I didn't cry. I felt past that. Instead, I felt something settle inside me, a quiet resolve. I realized then that this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about boundaries, about dignity, about what I would and would not accept from the people I loved. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. I woke early, made myself tea, and sat by the window as sunlight spilled across the floor. Somewhere across town, my son was putting on his suit. Somewhere, Emily was stepping into her dress, and I was here. At 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. I wish you were here. I typed back slowly, carefully. I was here all along. Then I stood up, put on my coat, and picked up my purse, because even if I wasn't invited, I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't finished yet. I didn't drive toward the vineyard that morning, not right away. Instead, I drove across town to the small park where Daniel used to play when he was little. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that feels earned. A few early walkers, a man tossing crumbs to pigeons, the low hum of traffic in the distance. I parked and sat for a while, hands folded in my lap, letting the ache in my chest settle into something I could carry. I needed to think, not as a wounded mother, but as a woman who had spent her whole life choosing calm over chaos. Because one thing had become painfully clear to me over the past few days. This wedding wasn't the betrayal, it was the symptom. The betrayal had been the silence, the decisions made without me, the way my role had quietly shifted from mother to inconvenience without anyone having the decency to say it out loud. I thought about Emily's parents, people I'd met only twice, both times briefly. They were polite, but distant. Her mother had smiled at me with a look that felt practiced, like she'd already decided where I belonged in the room. Her father barely spoke, just nodded when introduced, his attention drifting elsewhere. Traditional, Emily had said. I wondered what traditions required erasing a mother. By noon, my phone was buzzing steadily. Flowers began appearing in the family group chat. Flowers, chairs lined up in neat rows, a wide shot of the vineyard bathed in sunlight. I wasn't in the chat anymore, but my sister forwarded them to me, unaware. "It's beautiful," she wrote. "You must be so proud." I stared at the images until they blurred. Then I muted the conversation. I went home instead. There was something I needed to do before the day ended, something I had been putting off because it felt too final. I opened the drawer where I kept my paperwork, years of careful organization, tax returns, bank statements, receipts. At the back, in a plain manila folder, were copies of every payment I had made for the wedding, dates, amounts, notes scribbled in my own handwriting, venue deposit, catering, final, flowers. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way people expect. I felt clear. I called the venue. A young woman answered, cheerful and efficient. I gave her my name. She found my account immediately. "Yes, Mrs. Carter, everything is set for today. The ceremony should begin in about an hour." "I won't be attending," I said calmly. There was a pause. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I just wanted to confirm something. All payments were made by me, correct?" "Yes," she said. "Your name is listed as the primary contact." I closed my eyes. "Thank you. That's all." I hung up and sat back, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. Each second felt deliberate, measured. I wasn't calling to cancel anything. I wasn't going to sabotage my son's wedding. That would have been cruel. And no matter how hurt I was, I hadn't raised myself to be cruel. But I was done pretending that my absence didn't matter. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang again. Daniel. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. In the background, I could hear laughter, music, life going on without me. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm married." I smiled despite everything. "Congratulations." "Emily's parents are asking about you," he said quietly. "They thought you couldn't make it because you were ill." I closed my eyes. So that was the story. "I wasn't invited, Daniel," I said gently. "Let's not rewrite that." Another pause, longer this time. "I didn't think it would hurt you this much." "That," I replied, "is what hurts the most." After we hung up, I sat very still. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I simply allowed myself to feel the weight of what had happened without trying to soften it. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Daniel didn't call. Emily sent a brief text thanking me for everything and saying they'd talk soon. I didn't respond, not out of spite, but because I needed space to understand what I felt before I put words to it. A week later, a letter arrived. It was from Emily's parents. I recognized the handwriting immediately, tight, controlled, each letter carefully formed. Inside was a thank you card, generic, polite, and tucked inside it a note. "We regret any misunderstanding regarding the wedding arrangements. We hope you understand that certain decisions were made in the interest of harmony." Harmony. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. That evening, Daniel came by. He stood in my doorway like he used to when he was a teenager, uncertain, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes searching my face for clues. "I didn't know how to fix it," he said quietly. I stepped aside to let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one that had seen so many versions of us over the years. "I didn't need you to fix it. I needed you to see me." He looked down. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing her," he said. I nodded. I understood that fear. Love makes cowards of us sometimes. "And what about losing me?" I asked. He looked up then, his eyes wet. "I didn't think that was possible." That was the moment something shifted, not healed, but exposed. I reached across the table and took his hand. "I will always be your mother," I said, "but I won't always be silent." He squeezed my hand, and for the first time since the wedding, I felt the possibility of something honest growing in the space where hurt had been. But honesty, I was learning, comes with consequences, and those consequences were only just beginning. Daniel stayed for dinner that night. Though neither of us had planned it, I reheated soup from the freezer, the kind he used to like when he was sick as a child. He ate quietly, eyes down, spoon clinking softly against the bowl. Every now and then he would look up at me as if he wanted to say something, then think better of it. The silence between us wasn't hostile, it was heavy, full of things that hadn't been said yet. "I should have told you sooner," he said finally, "before money got involved, before everything." "Yes," I said. I didn't soften it for him. "You should have." He nodded, accepting that much at least. "Emily felt uncomfortable," he went on. "She said her parents wouldn't understand our family situation, the divorce, Dad leaving. She worried they'd judge. And so the solution was to hide me," I said quietly. He winced. "When you say it like that, that's because that's what it was," I replied, still calm, still measured. "I wasn't hidden for my own good, Daniel. I was hidden so other people wouldn't feel uncomfortable." He pushed his soup away, appetite gone. I didn't realize how far it had gone until it was too late. I looked at my son then, really looked at him. The lines of worry around his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. Marriage had come with a price tag he hadn't known how to calculate. "I love you," I said, "but love doesn't mean I accept being erased." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know that now." When he left that evening, he hugged me longer than usual. It felt like an apology and a plea wrapped into one. The following weeks were awkward. Emily and I exchanged polite messages, nothing deep, nothing real. She avoided eye contact when she came by with Daniel once to pick up some old boxes. She thanked me again for the wedding, as if money were the only thing she knew how to acknowledge. I watched them carefully, the way mothers do. I noticed how Emily spoke for Daniel in conversations, how she answered questions directed at him, how he deferred without even realizing it. It worried me. Not because I wanted control, but because I recognized the pattern. I had lived it once, in my own marriage, the slow shrinking of a self to keep the peace. One afternoon, a month after the wedding, Emily called me. "I wanted to clear the air," she said. Her tone was rehearsed, careful. "I'm listening," I replied. "I hope you understand that the wedding wasn't personal." I closed my eyes. "Emily," I said gently, "when a mother isn't invited to her son's wedding, it's personal whether you intend it to be or not." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't grow up the way Daniel did. My family believes certain things. Appearances matter." "And so does respect," I replied. She sighed. "I felt judged by you." That surprised me. "How?" "You're so composed," she said, "so self-sufficient, it made me feel like I was being measured." I thought about that, about how often confidence in a woman is mistaken for criticism by others. I was happy for you, that's all." We ended the call politely, but nothing had truly been resolved. A few days later, my sister called me in tears. "You won't believe what people are saying," she said. "What people?" "Emily's parents," she whispered. "They've been telling extended family that you refused to attend the wedding, that you disapproved of the marriage." I felt something cold settling my chest. So that was how the story was being told. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it, let it sink in, let myself feel the injustice of being quietly rewritten as the villain in someone else's narrative. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I spoke up. I invited my family over for dinner the following Sunday, aunts, cousins, even a few people I knew would carry stories back to Emily's side of the family. I didn't announce anything, I just cooked. Roast chicken, vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. After dessert, as coffee was poured and conversation settled, someone asked casually, "So why didn't you go to the wedding?" The room went quiet. I took a breath, not to steady myself, but to center myself. "I wasn't invited," I said simply. No dramatics, no accusations, just the truth. A murmur rippled through the room. "But you paid for it," my cousin said, confused. "Yes," I replied. Silence again, thicker this time. "I love my son," I continued, "and I wish him happiness, but I won't pretend something didn't hurt me just to make others comfortable." No one argued, no one challenged me. They didn't need to. The truth has a way of standing on its own when you let it. Word traveled as it always does. A week later, Daniel showed up again, this time alone. He looked angry. Not at me. "They lied," he said. "They told people you chose not to come." "I know," I said. "I told Emily's parents that wasn't true. I told them everything." I waited. "They didn't take it well," he admitted. "They said I should have protected my wife from embarrassment." "And who protected you?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "You always did." That night, something shifted between us, not back to how it was, but forward into something more honest. Emily didn't speak to me for a while after that. When she finally did, it was different, less polished, less defensive. I didn't realize how much damage silence could do. "It does the most," I replied. "We are still learning each other, carefully, slowly. I am not the villain in their story anymore, but even if I were, I have made peace with knowing the truth of my own actions. Because dignity, I've learned, isn't loud. It doesn't demand invitations. It simply refuses to disappear." After that conversation with Daniel, the house felt different. Quieter, but not in the hollow way it had been right after the wedding. This was a quieter that came with understanding, even if it was still bruised around the edges. I began to notice how often women like me are expected to swallow hurt gracefully, how we're praised for being strong when what people really mean is silent. I had been silent for a long time, and it had cost me more than I realized. Daniel started calling more often, not just quick check-ins, but real conversations. He asked about my work, about the quilt I was making, about the ache in my knee that flared up when it rained. Small things, the kind of things that remind you that you still matter. Emily, on the other hand, kept her distance. I didn't push. I knew better than to force closeness where there was still resentment. Healing, I've learned, doesn't respond well to pressure. 2 months after the wedding, they invited me to dinner at their place. It was a small apartment, neatly arranged, everything chosen carefully. Neutral colors, minimal clutter. Emily had a way of arranging life so nothing seemed out of place, including people. She greeted me politely, hugged me briefly, then stepped back. Daniel hovered nearby, nervous. Dinner was fine. Chicken, rice, conversation that skimmed the surface. Work, weather, plans for the holidays. Then Emily cleared her throat. "I want to say something," she said. Daniel looked at her, surprised. She turned to me. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. "I handled things badly," she said. "I thought avoiding conflict would keep things peaceful. I see now that it caused more harm." I studied her face. She looked sincere, tired too. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. She nodded. "My parents have strong opinions. I grew up believing it was easier to adjust myself than challenge them. I recognize that too. The difference between us was that I had spent years unlearning it." "I don't want to be a source of tension between you and Daniel," she continued. "And I don't want to be treated like one," I said gently. Daniel exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath the entire evening. After dinner, as I was putting on my coat, Emily surprised me by pressing an envelope in my hand. "What's this?" I asked. "A check," she said. "We want to pay you back." I looked down at the envelope. It was thick. "No," I said immediately. "That money was a gift." "We can't accept it after what we did," she insisted. "It doesn't feel right." I thought about it for a moment, about pride, about accountability. "Then do something better with it. Build your life thoughtfully. Treat people honestly. That's repayment enough." She nodded slowly. I could see the relief in her eyes. As I drove home that night, I felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped bending myself into a shape that made others comfortable at my expense. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected invitation. Emily's mother called. Her voice was stiff, formal. "We're hosting a small family gathering," she said. "We would like you to attend." I nearly laughed at the phrasing, "would like you to attend," as if attendance were a privilege being granted. "Why?" I asked. A pause. "Because Daniel insists." I considered it, not because I needed her approval, but because I wanted to see what accountability looked like from her. "I'll come, but I won't pretend." The gathering was polite, coldly polite. Emily's mother hugged me with arms that barely touched. Her father nodded, just as he had done the first time we met. At some point, someone brought up the wedding. Emily's mother smiled tightly. It was a beautiful day. "It was," I said. "I heard." The table went silent. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," I added calmly. "I'm sure it was worth the cost." Daniel stiffened beside me. Emily's mother flushed. "We did what we thought was best." "So did I replied. "The difference is I didn't lie about it." No one argued, no one apologized either, but something shifted. Power, maybe, or at least the illusion of it. I didn't stay long after that. In the months that followed, my relationship with Daniel settled into something steadier, less idealized, more honest. He began to speak up more, even when it was uncomfortable. I saw it with Emily's parents, with his work, with me. Growth is quiet. You don't always recognize it while it's happening. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly. He sat at the kitchen table, the old familiar place. "Emilia and I talked," he said, "about kids." My heart skipped. "Oh?" "If we have them," he said carefully, "I want them to know you, really know you." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That means a lot to me." "He don't want them growing up thinking love comes with conditions," he added. Neither did I. That night, alone in my house, I reflected on everything that had happened, the pain, the anger, the clarity that followed. I realized that the most powerful moment in all of this hadn't been the discovery or the confrontation. It had been the moment I stopped begging to be included. Because when you stop shrinking, the truth has nowhere left to hide. And that, more than any invitation, is what finally set me free. Life has a way of testing whether lessons have truly settled, or whether they were just temporary realizations brought on by pain. I learned that a few months later when the holidays approached. Thanksgiving had always been my day. My kitchen, my rules, my turkey that somehow turned out dry no matter how carefully I followed the recipe. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Daniel grew up carving the bird beside me, sneaking bites when he thought I wasn't looking. That year, Emily suggested hosting. It makes sense, Daniel said over the phone, cautiously. We have more space now, and Emily wants to start some traditions. Start some traditions. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I understand, I said, and I did. But understanding didn't erase the ache of being slowly edged out of spaces that once belonged to me. Emily called later that evening. I hope you don't feel pushed aside, she said. That's not my intention. I don't feel pushed, I replied. I feel adjusted to. She didn't know what to say to that. Thanksgiving came, and I showed up with a pie and a neutral expression. Emily's parents were there, so were a few of their relatives. The table was beautifully set. Everything looked curated, intentional. Even the conversation felt arranged. At one point, Emily's mother began telling a story about the wedding. She laughed, gestured animatedly, painted it as a flawless day, smooth and seamless. I noticed how Daniel stayed quiet. And of course, she added lightly, not everyone prefers big events. The implication was clear. I sipped my water and said nothing, not because I was afraid to speak, but because I didn't need to anymore. The people who mattered already knew the truth. After dinner, Daniel walked me to my car. I should have said something, he said. You're learning. That's enough for now. He hugged me, and for the first time, I felt like the embrace was equal. Not a child seeking comfort, not a man apologizing. Just two people who loved each other standing on level ground. A few weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I took a solo trip. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet coastal town a few hours away, a small bed and breakfast, long walks, mornings spent watching the ocean do what it has always done, move forward without asking permission. I thought about the years I had spent centering my life around everyone else's needs, about how easily motherhood can become self-erasure if you let it. I loved being a mother, still did, but I was more than that. On my last morning there, I sat in a cafe and wrote Daniel a letter. Not an email, a letter, something tangible. I didn't accuse, I didn't rehash. I told him what I hoped for him. A marriage built on honesty, a life where he didn't trade parts of himself for approval. I told him I was proud of him, not for the wedding, but for the moments afterward when he chose truth over comfort. When I returned home, I felt steadier, rooted. Emily reached out a few days later. I heard you went away, she said. I did. I wish I had your confidence, she admitted. I thought about that, about how confidence often grows out of being hurt and choosing yourself anyway. It comes with practice and a little loss, I said. She was quiet. My mother still doesn't understand you, she said. That's okay. She doesn't have to. The real shift came the following spring. Daniel and Emily announced they were expecting a baby. When Daniel told me, his voice trembled with excitement. You're going to be a grandmother. I sat down hard in my chair, my heart swelling with something close to joy and fear all at once. Emily called later that day. I want you involved, she said, from the beginning. I believed her. Not because she said it, but because of how she said it. No defensiveness, no qualifiers. At the baby shower, Emily introduced me proudly, not as an afterthought, not as an obligation, but as family. This is Daniel's mom. She's been incredible. Emily's parents smiled tightly. She said nothing, and for once, neither did I. I didn't need her acknowledgement anymore. As the months passed, Emily softened. Pregnancy has a way of rearranging your priorities. She asked questions about motherhood, about mistakes, about how to stay strong without becoming rigid. I answered honestly, sometimes gently, sometimes not. The day the baby was born, Daniel called me from the hospital, his voice thick with emotion. "She's beautiful. Emily wants you here." I arrived quietly. I washed my hands. I held my granddaughter for the first time, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around mine. Emily watched me carefully. Then she smiled. In that moment, something healed. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Later, when I drove home, I thought about the woman I had been at the grocery store months ago, standing there with cracked eggs and a cracked heart. I wish I could reach back through time and tell her this: "You will survive this. You will not disappear. And one day you will be seen, not because you demanded it, but because you refused to be erased." Becoming a grandmother changed something in me that I hadn't expected. It didn't soften the memory of what had happened, but it placed it into perspective. When I held that baby, warm, impossibly small, breathing softly against my chest, I felt the long line of women behind me, mothers who had loved quietly, who had been necessary but unseen, who had learned, sometimes too late, that love without boundaries can become a kind of self-erasure. Emily watched me closely in those early weeks. I could feel it, the way she hovered when I picked the baby up, the way she corrected small things, how I held the bottle, how I swaddled. I let her, not because I felt inferior, but because I remembered what it was like to be new at this, afraid, desperate to do everything right, terrified of judgment. One afternoon, while the baby slept between us on the couch, Emily finally said what had been sitting between us for months. "I was afraid of you," she admitted. I looked at her. "Why?" "You're self-contained," she said. "You don't ask for much. You don't perform. My mother always taught me that women like that are dangerous." I smiled faintly. Dangerous to what? She thought for a moment. To control. There it was. "I never wanted control over you or Daniel," I said. "I wanted honesty and respect." She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I see that now." That conversation didn't make us close overnight, but it made us real. Daniel changed too, in subtle but important ways. He began calling out misinformation when it surfaced. When Emily's mother made small comments about how some families are complicated, Daniel corrected her. "My family isn't complicated," he said once firmly. "It's honest." I heard about that later from Emily, who seemed both shaken and impressed. Progress often looks like discomfort. One evening, as I rocked the baby in the nursery, Emily stood in the doorway. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Go ahead." "Why didn't you fight harder?" she asked, "about the wedding?" The question surprised me. "I did fight, just not in the way you expected." She frowned slightly. "I fought by not begging, by not screaming, by letting the truth stand on its own, and by walking away with my dignity intact." She nodded slowly. "My mother would have made a scene." "I know," I said. "And you didn't." "I didn't need to," I replied. "I trusted that the people who mattered would eventually see." Emily exhaled. "I want to raise my daughter differently." "So do I. That's why this matters." Months passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. I babysat once a week. I went back to my routines, work, walks, evenings spent reading instead of replaying old conversations in my head. But every now and then, something would catch me off guard, like the day Emily's mother showed up unexpectedly while I was there. She stood stiffly in the living room watching me bounce the baby gently. "You're very comfortable with her," she said. "I raised her father," I replied. She hesitated, then quietly, "I suppose you did." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and sometimes that's as much as you get. Later that night, Daniel called me. "I don't know how you stay so calm. I'd still be angry." "I am angry," I told him. "I just don't let it drive anymore." There was a pause. "I'm glad you didn't walk away from us." I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. "I never walked away," I said. "I stepped back. There's a difference." One evening, as I tucked the baby into her crib, Emily watched me with a softness that hadn't been there before. "You know," she said, "when my mother talks about family now, she doesn't leave you out." I smiled faintly. Progress. "She still doesn't understand you." "That's okay," I said, and this time I meant it without any trace of sadness. Understanding isn't required for respect, and respect isn't dependent on approval. I realized then that the most important thing I had taught them, Daniel, Emily, even their parents, had nothing to do with money or weddings or tradition. It was this: that love does not require self-abandonment, that presence should never be conditional, and that silence, when chosen deliberately, can be louder than any confrontation. One afternoon, I ran into the same grocery store cashier who unknowingly delivered the worst news of my life. She smiled at me. "How are things?" I smiled back. "Better." She nodded, unaware of the weight that word carried. As I walked out to my car, bags in hand, I thought about how easily a life can be rerouted by a single moment, how pain, when handled with intention, can become clarity instead of bitterness. I had paid for my son's wedding. I hadn't been invited, but I had gained something far more valuable than a seat at a ceremony. I had reclaimed my voice, and in doing so, I had taught the people I loved how to see me, not as an accessory to their lives, but as a woman who stands fully in her own. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest edges of pain, but it also has a way of revealing what never truly healed. I learned that one quiet afternoon, nearly a year after the wedding, when Emily called me in tears. "I don't know what to do," she said. I was in my living room, sunlight slanting across the floor, dust motes floating lazily in the air. I sat down slowly, already bracing myself. "What happened?" I asked. "It's my mother," she said. "She keeps crossing lines. With the baby, with me, with Daniel." I closed my eyes. Some patterns don't disappear just because a new generation arrives. "She says she knows better," Emily continued, "about feeding, about routines, about how I should be as a wife. And when Daniel speaks up, she says I've changed him." I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I recognized the tone in her voice, the confusion, the guilt, the fear of being seen as ungrateful. When she finished, there was a long silence. "Emily," I said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why do you think she was so uncomfortable with me?" She hesitated. "Because you didn't ask permission to exist." The word surprised both of us. "That's exactly it," I said gently. "People who rely on control feel threatened by those who don't need it." She let out a shaky breath. "I don't want to become her," she whispered. I felt a tenderness toward her then that I hadn't before, not because she was hurting, but because she was aware. "You won't," I said. "Not if you keep listening to that discomfort, not if you're willing to disappoint people who benefit from your silence." There it was again, the same lesson arriving from a different door. A few days later, Daniel came by alone. He looked exhausted. "We set boundaries," he said, "real ones. Emily cried, her mother yelled, but we did it." I nodded. "How do you feel?" "Relieved," he admitted, "and terrified." "That means you did the right thing," I replied. He smiled weakly. "I learned that from you." That night, after he left, I sat with a cup of tea and let myself feel the full weight of that sentence. Not pride, something quieter, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the pain I'd carried hadn't been wasted. The following month, Emily invited me to join her at a parenting class, just the two of us. It was held in a community center room that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. We sat side by side, listening to a woman talk about attachment and boundaries and the importance of modeling self-respect for children. At one point, the instructor said, "Children learn how to treat themselves by watching how the adults in their lives allow others to treat them." Emily's eyes flicked toward me. Afterward, we sat in the car for a while before turning the engine on. "I think I understand now why what happened at the wedding hurt you so much." I waited. It wasn't just about being left out. It was about being told without words that your presence was optional. I swallowed. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner." That apology, quiet, specific, unforced, meant more to me than any grand gesture ever could. The following month, Emily's parents hosted another gathering, smaller this time, quieter. I was invited early, directly, with no qualifiers. I went, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted to see how far things had truly shifted. Emily's mother greeted me at the door. Her smile was still careful, but there was something else there now. Restraint, maybe, or recognition. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for inviting me." During dinner, she watched how I interacted with the baby, how Emily deferred to me sometimes, not out of obligation, but trust, how Daniel spoke freely. At one point, she cleared her throat. "I realize," she said stiffly, "that mistakes were made last year." The table went quiet. "I believed I was protecting my family. I see now that I caused harm instead." It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't warm, but it was honest. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. Later, as I was leaving, she stopped me. "You raised a good man," she said. I met her eyes. "So did you," I replied. That moment didn't erase the past, but it reframed it. Two women standing on opposite sides of tradition, finally acknowledging each other's humanity. On the drive home, I thought about how strange life is, how a wedding I never attended ended up teaching me more about myself than any celebration ever could. I had learned that inclusion offered out of obligation is not the same as belonging, that love measured by convenience is fragile, and that the most enduring relationships are built not on silence, but on the courage to be seen fully, even when it makes others uncomfortable. That night, I opened the old manila folder again, the one with the wedding receipts. I looked at them one last time, then shredded them carefully, page by page. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed proof of what I had given. What mattered now was what I had kept. By the time my granddaughter turned 1, the wedding felt like something that had happened in another lifetime. Not forgotten, but no longer bleeding. We celebrated her birthday in the backyard of Daniel and Emily's home, balloons tied to chairs, a lopsided cake Emily had baked herself, frosting uneven but earnest. Family gathered in small clusters, sunlight warming the grass beneath our feet. Emily's mother hovered as she always did, but quieter now, more observant, less commanding. I watched her watch me. When the baby toddled toward me, arms outstretched, Emily's mother didn't rush to intercept. She smiled instead. That alone told me how much it changed. At one point, Daniel lifted his glass and cleared his throat. "I want to say something," he said. The chatter faded. "I didn't always handle things well this past year," he continued. "I made choices that hurt people I love, especially my mom." My heart tightened. "She showed me that dignity doesn't come from demanding space," he said, his voice steady. "It comes from knowing when to step back and trust the truth to do its work." Emily reached for his hand. "I'm grateful she didn't give up on us," he finished, "even when it would have been easier to." There were murmurs of agreement. Someone clapped softly. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The acknowledgement was enough. Later, as I sat on the porch with Emily watching the baby smear frosting into her hair, Emily leaned toward me. "I used to think strength meant control," she said. "Now I think it means restraint." I smiled. "Restrained when it's chosen, not forced." She nodded. As the afternoon wound down, Emily's mother approached me. She stood beside me, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I've been thinking about last year," she said, "about the wedding." I waited. "I thought excluding you would make things simpler," she admitted. "I didn't consider the cost." I studied her face. There was no defensiveness there now, just fatigue. Control often feels like simplicity until it isn't. She nodded slowly. "I see that." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of laughter and children filling the space between us. "I'm glad you're here," she said finally. I believed her. On the drive home that evening, I felt something close to closure. Not the neat kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that settles into your bones when a story has finally told you what it needed to. Still, one piece lingered. A week later, I invited Daniel and Emily over, just the three of us, no baby, no audience. There was something I needed to say, and I wanted it heard without distraction. We sat at the kitchen table, this table, the one that had held so many versions of our lives. "I want to talk about the money," I said. Daniel stiffened. "Mom, we've been over." "I know," I said gently. "Just listen." They did. "I don't regret paying for the wedding. What I regret is that I didn't speak up sooner when I felt myself being reduced to a role instead of respected as a person." Emily looked down. "I don't want either of you to ever think love means self-sacrifice without consent, or that keeping the peace is worth losing your voice." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's not the example I want my granddaughter to grow up with," I added. Emily reached across the table and took my hand. "I won't forget that," she said. "Neither will I." That night after they left, I sat alone with my thoughts. I realized that the wedding, the absence, the humiliation, the anger had all been necessary in a strange way. Not because pain is noble, but because it forced truth into the open. It revealed where I had allowed myself to be minimized, where others had mistaken my calm for compliance. And it gave me the chance to correct that, not with rage, but with clarity. I thought about the many women who had written me letters over the years, friends, colleagues, neighbors, women who had been sidelined quietly, politely, for the sake of someone else's comfort. We are taught to disappear gracefully, to make ourselves smaller and call it love. But love that requires disappearance isn't love, it's convenience. A few days later, I received a message from a woman I barely knew, Emily's cousin. She wrote to thank me. "You don't know me well," she said, "but watching how you handled everything made me rethink some things in my own life." I stared at the message for a long time. Sometimes you don't get justice in the way you expect. Sometimes you get influence, and that can be just as powerful. As autumn settled in, I felt at peace, not because everything had been repaired perfectly, but because nothing important had been left unsaid. I had paid for my son's wedding. I hadn't been invited, but I had reclaimed something far more enduring than a seat in the audience. I had reclaimed my place fully and unapologetically in my own life. And that, I realized, was the ending I needed all along. The house feels different now. Not quieter, just settled, like furniture that's finally been moved into the right place after years of being slightly off. Some mornings I wake before the sun, make coffee, and sit by the window. The same window I sat beside the day I learned I wasn't invited to my own son's wedding. The memory still comes back sometimes, unannounced, like a distant ache in an old injury. But it no longer knocks the air out of me. It simply reminds me how far I've come. I see Daniel often. He stops by after work, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to ask advice he already half knows the answer to. He's gentler now, not just with me, but with himself. That matters more than he probably realizes. Emily and I have found our rhythm. It isn't forced, it isn't perfect, but it's honest. We talk about the baby, about work, about the strange ways motherhood reshapes a woman's sense of self. Sometimes we talk about nothing at all. There's comfort in that. One afternoon, as we folded tiny clothes together, Emily said, "I hope she grows up knowing she doesn't owe anyone her silence." I looked at my granddaughter sleeping nearby, her chest rising and falling in soft, steady breaths. "She will," I said, "because she'll see it modeled." That's how change happens, not in grand speeches, but in what children quietly absorb from the adults around them. I don't think about the money anymore, not really. Money was never the true cost. The real price was dignity, and that's something I refuse to lose permanently. Every now and then, someone brings up the wedding, an acquaintance, a distant relative. They'll say something like, "That must have been so hard," with a careful tone, as if afraid they might reopen a wound. I just smile and say, "It taught me what I needed to learn." Because it did. It taught me that generosity without boundaries invites erasure, that love doesn't mean self-neglect, that silence can feel like peace, but often isn't. Most of all, it taught me that you can be excluded from a room and still remain whole. The last time I saw Emily's mother, she asked me how I learned to be so calm through everything. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I wasn't always calm. I just learned not to confuse composure with weakness. She nodded, as if filing that away for later. We're all students in one way or another. Some lessons arrive late, some arrive wrapped in disappointment, but they arrive all the same. I used to believe that being a good mother meant sacrificing endlessly, swallowing hurt, making yourself smaller so others can stand taller. I don't believe that anymore. Being a good mother, being a good woman, means modeling self-respect, even when it makes people uncomfortable, especially then. If I could speak to the version of myself who sat at this window, staring at her phone, heart racing as she realized she'd been erased from something she helped build, I would tell her this: you are not foolish for loving deeply. You are not weak for choosing grace, but you are allowed to step back. You are allowed to be hurt, and you are allowed to require respect. Nothing about that makes you selfish. It makes you whole. Now when I sit here in the mornings, coffee warming my hands, birds beginning their quiet arguments in the trees, I feel something I didn't feel then. Peace, not because everything went my way, but because I stayed true to myself when it didn't. And if you're listening to this story, if you've ever given and found yourself quietly pushed aside, I want you to know this: you are not invisible. Your presence matters, and your dignity is not a negotiable item. Sometimes the hardest moments become the ones that free us if we're brave enough to listen to what they're trying to teach us. So I'll leave you with this question, the same way Auntie May always does. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent for the sake of peace, or would you have chosen yourself? Tell me in the comments, and if this story touched something in you, consider subscribing and supporting the channel. You never know whose life your listening might help change next.